of, the Torah portion is called Balak. And it's the story of, part of one of the stories in that Torah portion is the amazing story of the talking donkey and Balak, who hires a professional curser. Let me back up. Why? Why does Balak, who is Balak, and why is this all happening? Balak is the king of Moab, and he has a little problem. Actually, he has a major problem. And the major problem he has is that the Israelites' tribes are encamped at the border of his kingdom, and he believes, rightfully so, that they are about to attack and invade. And he knows from the stories that were going around the Middle East at the time that any army who had stood in front of the Israelites has been defeated. Not only does he, the king of Moab, know, but he knows that all of his soldiers also know. And you can imagine as they are looking, overlooking the encampment of Israel at their border, the fear and the dread that they are feeling. And so Balak has kind of a genius idea. In order to raise the spirit of his soldier to have a fighting chance against the Israelite armies, he's going to hire a professional curser, someone who will come and in front of his soldiers curse the tribes of Israel so that his soldier would feel that now they have an edge, they have an advantage over the Israelites who have been cursed. So he hires this world-renowned professional curser, Balaam, and he summons him at his borders in front of his armies between the encamped Israelites and his armies. And in front of everyone, he asks Balaam to curse the Israelites because it says in the Torah, because Balak says to Balaam in the ears of all of his soldiers, because anyone whom you curse is cursed, and anyone whom you blessed is blessed. So go ahead and curse them. And so they climb upon a little butte that overlooks the encampment of the Israelites. They build an altar there. Balaam do all his incantations, gets ready. There's a whole, special effects. You can imagine the potions and all of that. Concentrates. And as he goes to pronounce the curse that he was paid by the king to curse the Israelites with, instead, words of blessings come pouring out of his mouth. And he tells the king, I can only do what God tells me to do. I'm only a conduit for the words of the divine. So maybe something is happening here outside of my control. And Balak is furious. None of that. No one believes that. Go to this little butte over there. This one clearly didn't work. Go to that little one over there. And in the ears of all of my soldiers, curse the Israelite tribes. All right, so they go together. They again built him an altar. You imagine the potions, all the things that he's doing to get ready to curse. And then he looks down at the Israelite tribes, and in the moment of cursing them, words of blessing once again come pouring out of his mouth. Balak is irate. He can't believe his ears. He can't believe what's going on. All his plan to shore up the courage of his soldiers is seemingly falling apart. He said, one last chance. Do it this time. You can't do it this time. There's a third butte. I don't know how many buttes there were around the Israelite tribes. Clearly there were a lot, which means that it was not a really good strategic position to engage in war. Because if you're surrounded by little hills like that your enemy can curse you from, you're in trouble because they have the higher ground. Anyway, close this parenthesis. He goes to that third little hill, does the same shamanic thing, builds the altar, sacrifices, whatever, and in a moment of cursing the Israelites once again, and we'll sing these words in a little while, words of blessing come pouring out of his mouth. Dread spread through his armies. Now for sure they know they will be defeated. There is no way out of this. No way out of this. Now why did Balak think that cursing would actually work? What was in his consciousness that he thought that's really a great thing to do, that really will help us? He thought that because he understood human condition. And the human condition is that words matter. Words matter. Whether they are words of blessing or words of curses, words matter if those who hear them believe in them. We can see that in our own life. Sometimes we receive words that are not so much words of blessings, and if we believe those dark or difficult words, if they resonate within us, if they touch a chord within us, then we react. We react oftentimes in angry ways. We snap. We retaliate. Right? And this is kind of the same psychological context. Balak understood that these words of curses, if Balaam were to pronounce them, these words were going to seed the seed of courage in his soldiers. Words can have that kind of power over us once we believe them, once we assign them truth. Once we say truth, these words are truth. Once we believe in the story, then the story becomes real for us, whatever the story is. You can read this or understand this at the micro level or at the macro level. Any story we tell about ourselves that we come to believe becomes who we are. Any meta story of our nation, our civilization, our world that we come to believe becomes a reality. We, as you and me, members and citizens of this country of ours, live in this country because we share or we believe in the story we've been told about what America is, how it should be, its economy, its politics, its everything. We kind of go with the story of our civilization. Perhaps we've come to notice that we should do something about that story. Maybe it no longer serves us. And that, again, goes personally as it goes nationally or on the level of our civilization. Now keep that, because I'll come back to it, and actually I'm going to weave it in what I'm going to share with you next. A few days ago, in a meditation, I was shown one of those old wagon wheels, those wooden wheels. And the hub at the center was empty. And at the end of every spoke of the wheel was one of the roles I play in my life. One of the spoke was the role I play as a father. One was me as a son, me as a brother, me as a husband, me as a rabbi. And each of those spoke, which culminated in that role, had a specific story connected to that role that I played. The story of me father, the story of me rabbi, the story of me husband, the story of me son. It has that story embedded within. And each of those spoke was a very particular rendition, a particular expression of what I call me. It was me over here and me over there in different roles, embodying different stories. And they seemed to be completely different stories based on which spoke I followed. It's almost like at the end of each spoke was a different me. And all these roles, all these stories were actually mutually exclusive. Like I couldn't be in the role of husband with my brother. It just wouldn't work. I couldn't be in the role of rabbi with my wife if I wanted to still be married. So each of those stories really were separate stories. They were different stories. And it felt like in different contexts of my life, I actually embodied a different me, a different story. And so I looked at all of those roles that I play on the wheel, and I wonder which one of those is the totality of who I am, is the totality of me. Which one of those is that one expression that I can say, I could point to and say, this is me, this one. But I couldn't. Because as soon as I pointed to one, the other on the other side said, well, what about me? And I said, okay, so I am, no, but what about me? So none of these roles could be the totality of me. That was kind of disempowering. I didn't know where I stood. I could play a rabbi, but that wasn't totally who I am. I could play father, but that wasn't totally who I am. So I thought maybe if I just meditate further and in that vision I can put all the spokes together, then the totality, if I could merge all the spokes as one, that would be me. That would be me. But there was no possibility of bringing all the spokes together because they don't appear at the same time. There is no way to have all of them all at once. I cannot be all of those roles in one moment of my life. And think about it. There's no possibility for any one of us to be all of these roles, which we consider being ourselves, all at once. They are time-bound and space-bound. They're context-bound. Okay, so I was trying to figure out which one of those was me. And I couldn't find answers. I kept asking questions. So I asked, if I wasn't able to be all the spokes all at once, maybe one of them was a dominant one. You know, like the major me, and all the rest would be little me's, mini me's. You know, but not really, right? Maybe that would give me my sense of identity. I could find out who I am. And I tried and I looked and I said, okay, which one of those me is most me compared to any other? Which story is the story, my story, the story of me, most of all? And the more I looked at all the different roles that I play in my life, and I play a lot, because I exist in a lot of different contexts, as each of us does, I couldn't identify one that was the dominant one. As soon as I designated one, oh, you are, then the other screamed, what about us? They were irreconcilable. They were not, I could not put them together in any kind of order. They had to remain separate. There was no way that the story of Father Me was ever going to be more important than the story of Rabbi Me. That was not going to happen. Each, though infused, don't get me wrong, I think every story infuses every other story. I think that the Rabbi I am is impacted by the father I am, the husband I am, the son I am, But each one is still unique. They're not reducible to each other. But I stayed with the meditation, though frustrating it was. I ask, will the real me please stand up? Kind of defeated, surrendered. And it was nowhere to be found. I looked, and it was nowhere to be found. There were and always are going to be multiple me's, none of which is the actual me, which is very much a paradox. Each and every one of them owns a particular, partial, limited version of me that only gets activated when I exist in a specific context, in a specific place, at a specific time. And how is that for you? And so if we only exist in those compartmentalized little nuggets of me here, there, responding to the moment and embodying that role, that story in that moment, then who are we? Who are we? And it felt to me, and I don't know, I'm gonna leave you maybe with another question, but it felt like the center of the hub, that empty space at the center was that which in any given moment would rise up as one of the spokes and become that role and that story. And then when that was over, that story would recede at the center of the whole. And then when another moment arose that needed another role and another story, then that one arose from the center of the wheel until it came back into it. And every moment was outer and inner, coming out, being the role and the story for a while, and then collapsing back again into the emptiness of the center until another part of the story of the role showed up and needed to be manifested. And then back at the center, the empty center of the whole. And I thought that's exactly what Kabbalah tells us. That's exactly what Kabbalah tells us. How do I explain? Kabbalah tells us based on actually the story of Genesis. The story of the Garden of Eden. You know, the story of the Garden of Eden, just before Adam and Eve are ushered out of the garden, lovingly and kindly ushered out of the garden. Something happens right there. You might not remember because you don't play the role of the rabbi. God dresses them in garments of skin. Until that point, they didn't possess a body. They weren't dressed in garments of skin. That's literally what the Torah is saying. And actually, what's beautiful is the word for skin is or in Hebrew, and the word for light in Hebrew is or. Just spelled a little differently, different consonant, aleph versus ayin. And I believe that they were beings of light that got dressed in garments of skin. And I believe all of us, that is what the Kabbalah tries to explain, that all of us are beings of light, of the one light of the divine, at the center of the hub, dressed up in the garment of skins you inhabit right now. And so it makes sense from the Kabbalistic perspective that the hub is where each and every role we play emerges, but we are none of those roles. We cannot, the problem is that we identify with the roles. We think we are the roles we play, where in fact, we are the center of the hub that manifests as this role in this moment, in this context. One of my teachers, Muji, says, you are a gift of God to this world. Don't identify with a wrapping paper. But we identify with the roles become the me. But we can see, if we look, there is no me. There is a bundle of me, a bunch of them, but there is no one me. We are each expression of the empty center, the divine center of our being, existing in different contexts. And as I was driving here tonight, going through the beautiful streets, my mom said in the car, it's so lush and green here. We are blessed with a lot of rain, I told her. But I started to look at the trees as the garment of wood, the divine dressed as a tree, the divine dressed as the roses, the bushes of all the greenery that is in everyone's garden behind everybody's home. Each plant also the garment of the divine one, dressed up as a bush, as a tree, as a rose, as a tulip, as a whatever you look at. And I thought, in my meditation, I thought, now what would happen if I stopped believing in the stories? Which brings me back to Balaam. Which brings me back to the story of Balak and Balaam and the blessings and the curses, because there is a gorgeous rabbinic commentary on this very passage that tries to explain not just that God spoke through Balaam as he blessed the Israelites, but that he also himself was moved. Balaam himself was moved by the gorgeousness of the Israelites' encampment. And why the rabbis say, continuing on their own tangent, because rabbis love to do that, as I demonstrated tonight, why was the encampment of the Israelites so gorgeous that it moves Balaam so deeply that he couldn't curse them and bless them instead? The rabbis say that it was the way the tribes were ordered, and each clan within each tribe were ordered in their encampment that respected each family's integrity, each family's privacy, each family's authenticity, that just blew Balaam's mind. That it was such care and compassion and loving kindness embodied in just the way every encampment was set up vis-a-vis all of those who surrounded it, that Balaam's heart couldn't but open wide. And he was moved, deeply moved to bless, because what he saw was goodness. The Israelites' encampment embodied the story of goodness. How goodly, he said, how goodly your tent, O Israel, your dwelling places, your encampments, you Yaakov, Jacob. And that song, as promised, is on page 25.